Hello and welcome to MBKM Models. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe and follow for more great aircraft documentaries and model build videos. The Comet tank or tank cruiser Comet I-A34 was a British cruiser tank that first saw use near the end of the Second World War, during the Western Allied invasion of Germany. The Comet was developed from the earlier Cromwell tank with a lower profile, partly cast turret which mounted the new 77mm HV gun. This was a smaller version of the 17-pounder anti-tank gun, firing the same 76.2-inch projectiles with a lighter charge, and was effective against late-war German tanks including the Panther and Tiger. The Comet rendered the cruiser Mark 8 Challenger obsolete and was an interim solution until the completely new design Centurion tank was available. When firing APDS rounds, the 77mm HV was superior in armour penetration capability to the 75mm KWK-42 gun of the equivalent Axis tank Panther. The Comet entered active service in January 1945 and remained in British service until 1958. In some cases, Comets sold to other countries continued to operate into the 1980s. The British 11th Armoured Division was the first formation to receive the new tanks, with deliveries commencing in December 1944, and the 29th Armoured Brigade, then equipped with Shermans, was withdrawn from fighting in the southern Netherlands early in the same month for re-equipping. After arriving in Brussels and preparing to hand in their Shermans, the Ardennes offensive commenced, and the brigade was forced to hastily take back its Shermans to take part in the countering of the German attack. The unit returned to the Brussels area in the middle of January 1945, 3 weeks later, and finally paid off its Shermans in exchange for Comets. The 11th Armoured Division would be the only division to be completely refitted with the Comet by the end of the war. The Comet saw combat and 26 were destroyed, but due to its late arrival in the war in northwest Europe, it did not participate in any large battles. The Comet was involved in the Operation Plunder, crossing of the Rhine, and later the Berlin Victory Parade in July 1945. In the post-war era, the Comet served alongside the heavier Centurion tank, a successor introduced in the closing days of the Second World War on an experimental basis, but too late to see combat. The Comet remained in British service until 1958, when the remaining tanks were sold to foreign governments up until the 1980s. It was used by the armies of various nations, such as South Africa, which maintained several as modified recovery vehicles. 2 examples were still being held in reserve by the South African Army as late as 2000. 41 Comet Mark I Model Bs were also used by the Finnish Defence Forces Armoured Brigade until 1970. The tanks were stored until 2007, when 4 of them were auctioned. 4 Comets were delivered to the Irish Army in 1959 and a further 4 in 1960. Severe budget cutbacks affected the service lives of the Comets as not enough spares were purchased. The Comet appealed to the Irish Army as it was cheap to buy and run, had low ground pressure and good anti-tank capability. However, the faulty fuses meant the withdrawal of HE ammunition, which limited the tank's role to an anti-tank vehicle. With stocks of 77mm ammunition dwindling in 1969, the Army began an experiment to prolong the life of the vehicle. It involved replacing the turret with an open mounting with the Bofors 90mm PV-1110 recoilless rifle. The project was cancelled due to lack of funds. The last 77mm Comet shoot was in 1973, with the tanks being withdrawn soon afterwards. 1 is preserved in the Irish Curragh camp and 2 more survive in other barracks. Cuba was an operator of the Comet tank, operating 15 purchased from the UK. In 1958, the USA began to cut off weapons sales to Cuba, following the American government's decision to stop Cuba from using its US-supplied armaments against pro-communist socialist rebels throughout the country. The regime of Fulgencio Batista was forced to seek arms from other nations, which included the UK, which sold the Comet tanks from stocks. The government also allowed the purchase of 17 Hawker Sea Fury fighter aircraft from the manufacturer. The Comets arrived in Havana on the 17th of December 1958. After the collapse of the Batista regime on the 1st of January 1959, the new revolutionary government under Fidel Castro sought replacement parts and ammunition for their Comets from the British government, which, having agreed to no further arms sales to Cuba in conjunction with the USA, refused. The few Comets in Cuba were soon retired from service and either scrapped or abandoned, being replaced with larger quantities of T-34-85 and T-54-55 tanks received from the Soviet Union. Burma, the Union of Burma as it was then known, now Myanmar, was another user of the Comet tank, with around 25 bought from their former colonial rulers in between the late 1950s and the early 1960s. These took part in their Armed Forces Day held on the 27th of March 2021. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and until next time.